Well, I think teams are built from the bottom up, not from the top down. As you said, people use the term all the time. Really, what you're trying to do is to build a cohesive unit in which everybody's skills, everybody's capabilities are used to their maximum. So not everybody's going to be good at everything. And part of a team is to figure out how to get the best out of everybody.
Welcome to a special remastered edition of the Corporate Competitor Podcast presented by Forbes Books. We're bringing back one of our most popular episodes, this time in a brand new way. Originally released as audio only, this conversation is now available on video for the very first time, giving you a fresh perspective on one of our greatest interviews. This is part of a new series we're calling the Corporate Competitor Classics, where we revisit powerful, timeless leadership lessons from the archives and bring them to life on screen. If you've heard it before, I promise it hits differently when you see the story unfold. And if you're seeing it for the first time, you're in for something special. You may know our guest as former Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, but did you know that Dr. Condoleezza Rice was also the first woman to serve on the College Football Playoff Committee? Her love for the game started young, thanks to her father, who was a football coach. He taught her to break down defenses, and at just 6 years old, she was giving him advice. In addition to her political achievements, she became one of the first two women invited to join Augusta National Golf Club. Now, as director of Stanford's Hoover Institution, Dr. Rice continues to inspire future leaders with lessons from her extraordinary career. Enjoy this episode, and as always, you can download my notes at corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/notes. Dr. Rice, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure to join you. And please call me Condi. It's Dr. Rice is my father, so call me Condi.
Well, I will do that, but I'm always respectful because what you've accomplished in life is the stuff of legend. But I had the pleasure of speaking with you for a Sports Illustrated article many years ago, back in 2004. I was invited to interview you about your college football season predictions. Kind of a crazy thing to talk to someone of your significance about.
Yes.
But the president believed that I should ask you those questions. And when we published the piece, on one side of the two-page spread, you made your picks, and on the other page was some guy named James Carville. Who made his predictions. And at the end of the season, we actually noted in Sports Illustrated that you were far more accurate. Yeah. We're going to avoid the trash talk, but when you're looking at great teams, when you're thinking at the beginning of a season, like here's what I think can be exceptional. What kind of things are you looking for?
Right. And I'll say that, this has changed a bit because in the interim, I served for 3 years on the College Football Playoff Committee. And I have to admit, I see things differently, sitting in the room with great coaches like Ty Willingham and Tom Osborne and others, Barry Alvarez. You get a sense of how to look at teams a little bit differently. So I'm enjoying it even more these days. But I always look first and foremost for whether the team has an identity. Is there something that they can go to when they're down by 14 at the half? Is there something that they're going to establish early on? Because if they're kind of constantly trying to be something that they're not, the personnel doesn't match up with what they're doing, then they're not going to be very successful. And so I think teams that have an identity are the teams that are most successful. And by the way, that's also true of organizations. If they don't have an identity, then, and particularly the larger they are, the harder it is for people to understand the culture, what's expected. And it's especially important when things are going badly. So identity is very important. Secondly, are there leaders on their team who can bring out the best in others? And I don't just mean the loudest guy on the team. Sometimes we associate leadership with just being loud. But really, it's who has the respect, who would never ask things of somebody that they would never ask of, that they haven't asked of themselves, who gets to the film room ahead of everybody else and stays longer than anybody else. And so I think having leaders is very important. It's one reason that young teams, it's kind of hard for them because they haven't really established that who's the leader. And it's not always the quarterback. Sometimes it's somebody else. On my favorite team, the Cleveland Browns, Baker Mayfield is a leader, but I think Myles Garrett is really the essence of that team. And he, maybe more than anybody, has sort of changed the Cleveland Browns in the way that they think about themselves. So I think leadership. And then finally, the thing that I would say is, who did you play? Have you subjected yourself to the toughest possible competition? And are you running up points on inferior competition? And by the way, again, for organizations, for corporations, for universities, you have to constantly be measuring yourself. And by the way, for individuals, constantly measuring yourself against the best.
Yeah, because it's easy. What does the Navy SEAL say? A players want to play with A players, right? B players want to play with C players.
Right.
And so you do that. But I love that idea about team identity. And what's interesting is how often a really good team, a really good leader will shift that sometimes based on the talent that they have around them, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because whatever you're going to do, it has to match with the capabilities that are there. I think it was Don Rumsfeld who once said, I have to go with the army that I have. And so you can't go with the team or the organization that you wish you had or that you would like to have. You have to go with the team that you have. And of course, the best organizations ultimately recruit to that identity. But it's really important that capabilities and expectations and what you're trying to do match up.
I love it. Growing up, your father, John Wesley Rice Jr., coached high school. Dr. John Wesley Rice Jr. coached high school football in Birmingham. And every week, I remember reading that you and your dad would watch your beloved Cleveland Browns and the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Yes.
You both also, you shared this with me, that you would, in the summers, race to the store to grab Street and Smith's Pro Sports football report so you could analyze offenses and defenses together. Is there a memory you have with your father of thinking through teams and what they might be capable of being?
Oh, absolutely. And you're right about rushing to the drugstore, which is where you bought the report. And we would go through it page by page and we'd look at every team. But I think the most exciting analysis that we ever did was when the first Super Bowl, called the World Championship, I think originally, between the Green Bay Packers and the Kansas City Chiefs. And neither of those was particularly our team, by the way. I was not a great fan of the Green Bay Packers, although I really respected Vince Lombardi. And we sat there and we analyzed. And interestingly, my father thought the Chiefs had a chance. And of course, they would go on to defeat the Vikings a couple of years later and really set off then the merger of the then two distinct leagues. But we thought that Max McGee was going to have a big game for the Green Bay Packers, and who knew? He did. So that was one of my really great memories, was watching that first Super Bowl with my dad.
And when you have a father who's a coach, you mentioned sitting with coaches in those rooms, but you would have to learn the game differently too. And what was as you're analyzing those teams, is there you mentioned leadership, identity, other things, but those pages are mostly filled with statistics.
Yeah.
Were there some stats? Were there some numbers? We're hyper focused on the world of stats these days, but even back then, were there some numbers like turnover ratios or other things that you guys constantly thought this gives one team an advantage, something that would be impactful?
Well, actually, of course, turnover ratio matters a lot. If you're constantly turning over the ball, it's going to be a problem. But my dad was an offensive lineman. And so he would say, watch the offensive line. And his view was that the most important down was actually second down. And so people think first down and you have to, and you get it because he always thought, yeah, first down's important. But if you haven't gotten yourself to 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, because he was basically a, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of guy. And by the way, I too prefer teams that really can run the ball. So when I'm looking for a team, I'm looking for a team that can control the line of scrimmage. And you control the line of scrimmage by running the ball. And so I looked very closely at yards per carry for your backs. When I was on the committee, we had every statistic known to humankind at our disposal. But when it came right down to it, football is actually kind of a game of dominance. And if you are dominating the line of scrimmage, it's not always time of possession, by the way. I think that's a kind of false stat sometimes because even teams, I remember the old Cincinnati Bengals of the early 1980s had those big.
Boomer Esiason.
Right. Well, but Max Montoya.
Oh, yeah.
And Anthony Munoz, right?
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
It was 8 yards and 4 yards and 12 yards and on the ground. And they would go into what they call their attack huddle. And so they never had much time of possession because they were just plowing down the field. So I learned I think I'm really a line of scrimmage kind of person who's dominating that line of scrimmage. That's what I want to see. There was one amendment to that, and it was my good friend Bill Walsh, because the West Coast offense was kind of a running game that looked like short passes. So that was probably the one exception to my dominate the line of scrimmage rule.
Wow, I love it. You did an interview with Forbes a number of years ago in which you talked about when you were a young fellow with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, your first year there, and you noted that you became more respected by your peers after a particular week in the football pool. Like you dominated everybody else, but you had this great line: "Football is a language that transcends gender." Right? Can you elaborate more on that story and tell us kind of how your interest in sports has allowed you to enter conversations or be even in places that you might not otherwise have been?
Sure. Well, at the age of 30, I had this fellowship to work for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I worked for the division that did strategic nuclear planning. They were the guys who wrote the single integrated operations plan for the employment of nuclear weapons. They were kind of serious people. I was 3 things they'd never seen: female, Black, and civilian. And the first day they said, the rookie makes the coffee. And, I could have gotten all huffy about it and said, I'm a Stanford faculty member. I don't make coffee, but I made the coffee. Truth is, I make coffee so strong, nobody can drink it. So it asked me to do that again. But the very next week I did in September win the NFL football pool. And that gave us something to talk about on Monday morning. Why were the Packers so flat? Or did you see those the Cowboys play, and they never seem to be in playoff position, and et cetera, et cetera. And so it was a kind of bridging language. And I tell people who are different, we spend a lot of time these days talking about diversity and inclusion, and those are really important concepts. But if you're the different one, you can bridge back to the people, to others as well. They don't have to, quote, make you comfortable. You can bridge back to them. And I've always found in settings, if you need to break the ice a little bit, sports is really a great way to break the ice.
It's so funny. My wife jokes all the time. She doesn't know a lot, but she hears me talk a lot about it. And so every once in a while, she works in politics down here in Florida, and she'll just throw something she's heard from me, and she'll see everybody kind of suddenly look differently. It is that bridge. You're not kidding. But your expertise became so in your knowledge of this wasn't just the casual bridge. You were so good at it and knowledgeable that they did invite you to join the initial college football playoff committee. 13 people deciding who gets to play for the national championship. And you mentioned earlier that being surrounded by, you suddenly had a new perspective on how to watch. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how being in rooms like that, such a unique place, changed a little bit about how you would see sports and maybe even some of the applications that you learned out of that?
Well, I'd always been, as you said, kind of analytical about the game. At 6 years old, oh, what are they doing, Condoleezza? Oh, Daddy, that's a trap block, or or they're setting up a screen, Daddy. So I knew the game in that way. But that was a committee that, for me, it was a trust, because we were about to realize the dreams, I think, of every college football fan going back for decades. I've described how outraged my father was when a man that I would come to love when I went to Notre Dame, but when Eric Parsegian went for the tie in that 66 game against Michigan State, and Alabama gets shunted aside. Notre Dame wins the national championship. I remember my father just slamming down the something and saying, "We need a playoff." And so I felt,
wow,
that it's kind of somehow asserting that those fans who had wanted a playoff, I had their responsibility in my hands. And so I thought it was a very serious matter. It was a committee that worked really, really hard. You would go through the statistics and watch the games. I watched 12 games every Saturday. I watched another 7 or 8 on what's called coach's tape, the 45 minutes cut down. And then we would get on a plane on Monday, go to Dallas and debate. And in those debates, I was somebody who understood and kind of loved the statistics, and there were a couple of others like that. But the coach's eye, I just came to be so respectful of the coach's eye. They just saw little nuances that were hard for me to see. And as they began to point them out, I started to look for them too. Just small things like how hard are they having to work against that pass rush? Are they having to chip the pass rusher? Are they having to double team the pass rusher? Is that opening up other avenues for the offense? And I told Barry Alvarez, who became one of my great buddies on the committee, I said, Barry, you're what my father would have called a football man, which was the highest praise he could give anybody. And learning from those coaches, I do now watch the game very differently. And I guess maybe just watching so many games, I see penalties before they are called, that kind of thing. So it's really fun. But my mother was a musician. It was music with my mom. It was sports with my dad. And I will tell you this, though. My mother got tired of being left out on Sundays when we were in there watching the NFL. So she came in one day and she said, "Okay, I'm going to pick a team. I'm taking them. I like their colors." 1972 Miami Dolphins. So
I like their colors.
Every Sunday she would come in and she'd say, "Did they win?" We'd say, "Yes." "Did they win?" "Yes." And then from that time on, she was a captured football fan too. And so we would watch the games, not just with my dad, but my mom would also chime in.
I'm sure there are a lot of teams that would hate it that they got picked for the colors. And how old were you when your dad said, "We need a playoff"?
So 66. So I was 11.
Wow.
When that happened. Yeah.
That's crazy. So, but there's a lot of, it seems like, again, I've never been in one of those rooms. Very few of us have in the world. But when you talk to or listen to the Monday morning quarterbacking after the conversations that you have, there seems to be some negotiation going on in there about, here's what I saw here. What did you do? Was there anything about the way people convinced each other that might be a lesson we could learn from that time?
Well, let me say first that we had to get to consensus. So it's like jury voting. And you have to get consensus. So you have to talk about it. And if people have different views, sometimes it was really obvious, but a lot of the time it really wasn't very obvious. And so the great thing is people would make their arguments. It was intense. It was never mean-spirited. And I kind of got a reputation of helping people to see what the other person was saying, because that's what I did as a diplomat. As a diplomat,
you're playing diplomacy in the CFP room.
You have to kind of listen to everybody and try to figure out where the interest overlap is between what appear to be irreconcilable views. And so I would sort of say, well, I was hearing Barry say this, and I thought I heard Tom say that. And, is it possible that this? And so I found myself being sort of the diplomat in the room to help people figure out what was really being said. So that was kind of fun. And the nice thing about it is you realize that if you're going to help to do that, you need to just sit back and listen for a while. You can't just kind of put your views out there. You have to sit back and listen. We had a structure, and I think they still do, where you followed one Power Five team and one Group of Five team, and you
each
followed
member
them in pairs. And each member had. So the first year, for instance, I had the Big Ten and I had Conference USA. So you were responsible first and foremost for making sure that the reporting took place on every game that was relevant in those conferences. So that was an important role that you had to play too. And it meant that you really had to kind of do your homework, and you watched a lot of games that you probably would not have otherwise watched. And one year I had the Big 12. And that was not the Big 12 of today. That was the Big 12 where it was kind of a video game, where
basketball on grass.
Exactly, where you put all your best players on offense, and then these poor defensive backs are back there kind of waving their arms. And so when I would report on the Big 12 and the numbers were so big and the yardage was so big, we would have to go to the comparative perspective to look at why this might be happening. So I learned to look at games that way too, not just who's winning, but why are they winning and why are they scoring so much? And I think that's been really interesting. And I've continued to look at games that way.
I love it. You mentioned that, and you may have answered the question, but I want to ask you, you mentioned that the need for diplomacy in meetings, right? And obviously that's still really relevant. Many of the leaders who listen on this podcast are always looking to learn too what they can do in their own lives. And what's the key to being able to be the diplomat in the room when you've got a group of opinions that are all pretty strongly held?
Yeah. The first thing is that if you are deciding that you're going to try to play the role of bringing people together, bridging differences, you have to take your own ego aside for a bit and say, all right, I'm not going to try to impose my views here. My role here is to listen very carefully to everybody and to see if I can hear things that might suggest that there are common beliefs here or common ways of seeing this that aren't being recognized. Because sometimes a disagreement is just a disagreement. But sometimes a disagreement is because people are talking past each other. And I find, not just in that football room, but when I was doing diplomacy, and the American Secretary of State walks in and everybody wants to hear what the American Secretary of State is going to say. And that's been true since the end of World War II. And I'm sure Tony Blinken would tell you that that's the case today. But sometimes it's better for the American Secretary of State to sit back, hear what others are thinking, because once the American Secretary of State has spoken, everybody's reacting to that, not really putting forward their true views. And so in whatever room I've been in, including when I was in the football committee, it was to try to put my own views in the background for a little bit and hear what people were saying and see if I could help people to see that they might even be saying much the same thing.
Before we continue, I want to remind you that if one of your 2025 goals is writing a book, but you don't know where to start, I'm here to help. In my new role as publisher at Forbes Books, I'm working alongside a world-class team to guide aspiring authors like you through the process of getting published. Whether it's a story, a big idea, or a project close to your heart, now's the time to make it happen. Just visit forbesbooks.com/Don to get started. And I love the way you put that. Sometimes it's hearing what people are saying and in presenting it with a new set of words. You're saying the same thing, but they might hear it differently, and maybe from a new voice helps as well. I love that. But listening was the was the thing that really stood out to me. I'm assuming that you're a world-class listener, which
I sure try to be. I sure try to be. And I try to get my kids, my students to be good listeners too. Sometimes, particularly with young college students, they want to raise their hand quickly and fast. And I say, I haven't even finished the question. Could you just,
it is a lost art, isn't it?
It is a lost art. It's a lost art.
Not only did you grow up watching and analyzing football, but you're also a competitor in your own sport. And from age of 6, you took the ice to compete in figure skating. Yeah. And I loved it. You're our first figure skater on the podcast. But competing can teach us a lot of things, including how to manage failure. And in an article, you actually described yourself as terrible at skating. I thought that was your word, terrible. Yeah. Despite spending years waking up at 4:30, putting in the work. Can you share what lessons you learned from your, not just watching, but your participation in athletics?
Well, I'm not being facetious. The first lesson I learned is pick the right sport. I'm 5'8". I've got 5'10" legs. Figure skating wasn't the right sport. And I can remember all the judges, whenever I would skate, saying, you need a soft knee. And I thought, don't you think I'm trying to bend my knees? It just, doesn't work for me. And so, and many years later, when I picked up a tennis racket for the first time, I thought, oh, that was my sport. So the first clue is pick the right sport. But then if you find that you just love the sport, which is what happened to me with skating, and I would work very, very hard at it. And, I'd have occasionally good performances, but more often than not, something that was for me disappointing. The great lesson is you have to get up the next day and try again. You have to keep going. It's a little bit like life. You can't let a bad outcome just defeat you for all time. And when I watch the best athletes, even who are very, very good at their sport, they're able to put behind them the bad performance or the bad play and move on. And I watch a lot of college sports in particular because here at Stanford, we have an outstanding intercollegiate program. And I just love watching the way that whatever happens, they're back there the next day practicing and at it again. The other thing it teaches you is time management and discipline. If you have to, as I did, I was also a pianist, so I had to find time for practicing the piano and performing there and skating in school. My father once said to me when I was an adult, he said, you're almost as busy now as when you were a teenager, because it was always some activity. So I learned to manage my time. And again, with college athletes, I very often find that they are the best time managers on campus because they have to get it all done. And then the final thing is that you can't just keep doing things that are easy for you. Now, I'm learning this the hard way in golf these days because I'm really good off the tee. I'm long. I love to hit the ball off the tee. It was the first time I hit a driver that I realized I was going to love golf. And I'm a really good putter. Everything in between is kind of an adventure. And so I've had to really spend time working on my irons. I've had to spend time working on my short game, which used to be a liability. It's still not an asset, but it's not a liability anymore. And so you learn that to be a complete athlete, you have to work on the things that you're not good at doing. And we all, as human beings, love to do the things that we're good at doing because it feels good and it's fulfilling. But it's, again, a lesson that I tell my students. You have to identify the things that you're not good at and work harder on those than the things that you're good at doing.
So what was the key? What did you do to make that short game get better?
Practice.
Just repetition?
Just repetition. And I have a couple of friends who have really good short games. And I go and play little matches against them. And after a while, you get tired of losing to your friends. And so then you go out and get better.
I like it. Good. We got a real competitor here. I love the way you came to pick up golf. I read a story in USGA Golf Journal about how you picked up the game. Would you share it?
Sure. I had never wanted to play golf. I was a figure skater, and then I was a tennis player. And I thought golf was boring. And so,
And 4 hours. Oh my gosh.
and 4 hours of chasing a little white ball. Who wants to do that? And so, and I had the athletes concede about golf either. I mean, how hard could it be, really? So I went on vacation to the Greenbrier the summer after I became Secretary of State with my cousin and some other ladies. And my cousin's husband was a golfer, and he gave her golf lessons at the camp at the Greenbrier. And he gave me buddy lessons so she would go. So we went, and sure enough, the first day it was hit 7-iron, 7-iron, 7-iron. I thought, yep, this is every bit as boring as I thought. And then the next day they let us hit a driver. And all of a sudden I was in love. And so I went back to DC. Now I was Secretary of State. I have no time, but I went out to Andrews Air Force Base where they had golf courses. And I said to the pro, a man named Alan Burton, I said, you're going to have to teach me this on the course because I don't have time to go to a range. The good thing is when you're Secretary of State, they shut down the 6 holes in front of you and 6 holes behind you in an Air Force Base. So I would go out there.
Secret Service running. They'll chase your ball down for you.
Chase your ball down for you. But the best thing was my security detail was really comfortable because I was on an Air Force base. So unlike normal life, when you're Secretary of State, where there's always somebody on top of you, right? They're security people, and you don't ever walk very far. You get right into your car and right into the building. I loved being outside and walking and going to find my ball in the bushes. And it was liberating. And it became, for me, a really transporting experience where I could get away from everything else. I knew that if I could just get the ball going forward, I was eventually going to move back to California, where the Stanford golf course is 5 minutes from my house, and I could take it up seriously. But they've
had a few amazing players on that course.
They've had a few amazing players, the great Tiger Woods, the great Tom Watson, great Sandy Tatum. And by the way, we continue to have great players in our women's teams, which won the title in 2015. Both the teams look really good, but the women look really strong this year.
Wow. I love it. For a sport that you picked up so late, I mean, you became quite an important figure. When in 2012, you became one of the first 2 women to be invited to join Augusta. Did you have any aspiration to want to go join Augusta, or did it just? I mean, how does a phone call like that come to be?
Well, I say all the time that people who became first weren't setting out to be first. They just wanted to. I had been to Augusta with George Schultz, late George Schultz, and really well before I could play Augusta because I could barely keep the ball in the air those days. But I loved the place. I loved the tradition of it. And now I love our institutions that are timeless in some ways, but able to change. So a friend actually came out, the person who I'd known for Lee Steisinger, who I'd known in Birmingham, came out and he asked to see me for just a few minutes. And I said, so Lee, why are you here? And he said, well, I'm here because we'd like you to become a member of Augusta National. And I was just, couldn't say a word. And after a little while, he said, you are going to say yes, right? And I said, sure. But it's been the most wonderful experience. It is a great experience for all kinds of reasons, including Augusta's dedication to changing the game, changing the face of the game, changing access to the game. Everything from sponsoring the amateurs for Latin America and for Asia, through which Matsuyama becomes a great figure. The women's amateur now, which is just a thrill to watch the best amateurs play on that course. And then the drive, chip, and putt, which is in some ways my favorite. These kids who come and as they've begun to grow up, and a couple of them have been very successful, I get texts from time to time saying, do you remember me? You greeted me on the 18th green when I was 11. So I think Augusta has done a lot for the game and continues to do a lot for the game.
Which is so amazing, isn't it? Because for so many years, it was people considered it the stick in the mud place. So, I mean, the idea that it's that it's progressing, and that it's and that you're able to kind of have a front row seat into that, and be engaged in those conversations. I think that's enormously powerful.
Well, it's very exciting. And the Chairman Billy Payne, now Chairman Emeritus, and the current Chairman, Fred Ridley, by the way, who was a fantastic amateur, and one of the few winners of the U.S. Amateur who didn't go professional. And so we've always sort of thought it was kind of Bobby Jones reincarnated.
That's, yeah, definitely. It's funny. One of the advantages of being a member there at Augusta is in a Masters week, there's a day, I think it's the Sunday before, correct, where you get to play with one of the pros who will be competing that week. And I mentioned earlier, I just finished writing a book with Bubba Watson, and he says there's nobody he enjoys the experience more with than you. I think you and Lee and Bubba's wife play pretty regular. Now, he's a quirky soul, right? I can say that. I know him, love him as you do. But we actually had him on one of the podcasts. Is there something you've learned playing with a guy like Bubba Watson?
Well, I think it won't surprise him. The creativity is off the charts. He just sees things that nobody sees. And it's actually made me want to be a little more creative with my game. So, if you are behind a tree, maybe you don't have to just chip it out. Maybe there's some way to turn it around. So I kind of from time to time will bring my inner Bubba out.
Bring your inner Bubba.
Exactly. Or my other great friend Phil, my inner Phil, and kind of go for it. But he has a marvelous creative eye, but he's also so competitive. Even when he's playing with Lee against me and Angie, his wife, he really wants to win. So I'll never forget. I hit maybe on number 4, which is a really long par 3 at Augusta when we were playing. I hit maybe the best shot I've ever hit on that hole, and I was within 4 feet for birdie. And Bubba gets up and hits it to 3, and I thought, you just had to do that, right? You just had to do that. So he's very competitive, but he's a wonderful spiritual person, greatly religious person, wonderful family person, talks a lot about his kids. And he and Angie just have a wonderful relationship, wonderful marriage. She's really good for him. He's good for her. And I think they recognize it.
I was in Pensacola just a few weeks ago and had dinner with them, and as the family dinner, and it was just really fun to watch. You're right, watch them. Like Caleb and Dakota.
She's a great athlete, by the way. Of course, basketball player,
WNBA player, not bad.
WNBA player. So it's fun to play with Angie too. She's the athletic part of our team.
Yeah, well, she's the athletic part of his family. I tell him that all the time too. He's just a golfer.
Yeah.
But your father, very accomplished in his life, right? Not only was he a football coach, but he was a three-sport athlete in college, a minister, a teacher, even the dean of students at Stillman. What did you learn about leadership from him?
My dad was somebody who really sought out people that he thought he could help, and that he thought had leadership characteristics. He had, segregated Birmingham was not an easy place to be a teenager. I was younger in segregated Birmingham, but my father had this youth fellowship at his church where he would, kids would come from all over the city, not just kids who were part of his church, but from other places. He used to joke and say it was because he could have dances and the Baptists couldn't, but he would bring all these kids on Sunday afternoons, and he would just give them experience after experience after experience, take them to Stillman College in Tuscaloosa to stay for a week so they knew what it was like to be on a college campus. One of the most remarkable things that he did was he would take them over. There was a temple, and he became friendly with this rabbi. And he wanted them to understand Judaism. So he took them over to talk to the rabbi about Judaism. Long before segregation ended, the head of the minister of Shades Valley Presbyterian, which was white, and his church, which was black, decided to get the kids together. So he was really pretty revolutionary in the way that he dealt with limited circumstances, but he never forgot the importance of education. And to him, his job was to educate. And I think I've learned that if you're going to be a leader, you have to decide what's your best way to intervene in other people's lives. And I followed him, and as, by the way, my mother as well. Education for me and being an educator, with all the jobs I've had, I define myself first and foremost as an educator.
Wow. Coach Wooden, I had a chance to work with John Wood many years ago, and he never called himself a coach. He said, I just want to be known as a teacher. I think that's, he always called it the most honorable profession, that opportunity. But what I love listening to you talk about your father there, you've talked about bridging language, right? He went beyond language, right? He went to bridging exercises, if you would, to try to figure out. I mean, in this day and age, boy, do we need more dialogue, and do we need more, bridging opportunities? How powerful.
Right. Well, he was determined not to let the circumstances dictate the outcomes, so to speak. And so, and he bridged across racial lines. He also bridged across socioeconomic lines. His church, Westminster Presbyterian, and he was by this time, guidance counselor at Ullman High School. My mom was a teacher in the city, and all of our little community, I think everybody taught school, with the exception of one lawyer, one doctor. Everybody else taught school. But his church was like that. They were all educated people. Behind the church, there was a government project called Loveland's Village, and very low socioeconomic status, not many options. And my dad would have on Tuesday nights tutors come in to tutor kids in algebra or chemistry. He would have the dentist come to the church on Wednesday to do free dental work. He would have the kids from Loveland's Village come for a Thanksgiving basket. And he got some criticism about it, by the way, from his church, because they kind of liked their status in Birmingham. And here he was breaking down those barriers of status. And so he was a bridger in so many ways.
And what a great, again, I know what an influence he was in your life, just to talk to you about it before, but he can talk to you all day long about those things. It's far more valuable for you to see them.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have expectations that's how you would try to live your life too. And I should just say one thing, my mother was much the same way. She taught in one of the toughest districts in the city, Inslee, which was out by the steel mills. And she used to say, those kids deserve the best too. And she would put on every year an operetta where they would sing and do operettas. And, people from this very poor community would get dressed up in their Sunday best and come to the operetta. And so my parents really taught me that it's great to have talents and gifts and resources, but if you're not reaching across and giving back, then it's not working. And they were also religious and believed that it was a part of our religious obligation as well. But because my dad, I think, met so many people through sports, so many kids that he taught, that was a big part of his outreach too. Oh, by the way, I should mention my mother's student was Willie Mays. So
what? Your
yes,
mother?
My mother taught Willie Mays, taught him in ninth grade, taught him English in ninth grade. And I saw Willie Mays at a baseball game. And I said to him, do you remember by any chance my mother? And he said, well, what was your mother's name? And I said, well, it would have been Angelina Ray. He said, oh, yes, I remember Miss Ray. He said, she told me, son, you're going to be a ball player. If you need to leave a little early, you go ahead and do it. And I said, yeah, it doesn't sound quite like my mother, but it's a great story. I'll roll with it.
Yeah, because she wasn't letting you off early on anything. So that's funny. One question we've asked everybody that we've had the opportunity, the blessing to be able to interview in this podcast, is about teams. A lot of people in corporate, political, whatever environment, they refer to their organization as a team, even though it's frankly just a bunch of independent contractors all maybe carrying the same business card. Uh, so teams are, I think, is one of those overused monikers. But um, you know what it's like to be part of a team, both in a political circle and in other environments. What elements would you coach a leader who's trying to build a team to try to get that collection of individuals to give of themselves and become a team? What way would you coach somebody to be better in that area?
Well, I think teams are built from the bottom up, not from the top down. As you said, people use the term all the time. And really, what you're trying to do is to build a cohesive unit in which everybody's skills, everybody's capabilities are used to their maximum. So not everybody's going to be good at everything. And part of a team is to figure out how to get the best out of everybody. One reason that I love kind of sports analogies is, if everybody were an offensive lineman on a football team, it wouldn't work very well, right? So you're trying to bring different skill sets together in order to get a cohesive group that can then achieve. And so you have to very carefully make sure that people are bringing different skill sets and that they're meshing, and that everybody's respected for what they do. Another thing I like about sports is nobody's going to say to the offensive lineman, well, you just block, right? That's not really important. I throw the ball. Well, yeah, try throwing the ball if the offensive lineman doesn't block. And
with Myles Garrett breathing in your neck.
Exactly. Myles Garrett's going to be sitting in your living room. And so the key is that everybody has to have their contribution, and everybody has to respect everybody else's contribution. Another great analogy is when you look at something like special forces. I've spent a lot of time with special forces guys, and they will tell you that they just have to be able to trust that that person next to them is going to do his job. They can't try to do that person's job. And so I often use that analogy with teams that I'm trying to build, or sports analogies again. I can't worry about what the tight end is doing. I have to assume he's going to do his job. And teams that can build that kind of trust, where and the way that you do it is you practice and you gain confidence in each other. You gain trust in each other. And the final thing is you don't gossip about one another. The first thing that can break a team apart more quickly than anything else is when people are constantly whispering about one another or talking down about somebody behind their back. And, they talk in sports about losing the locker room. I think that's really what they mean. When people are being, if you want to be critical of somebody, be critical to their face. Don't hide in the shadows and do it, and then work it out. Because if you can't do that, then the team is going to implode eventually.
I had a chance to work with the All Blacks, the rugby team in New Zealand a few years ago. And that's one of their key core principles is stab me in the front, not the back.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And I remember the first time I heard it, I thought, oh my gosh, like stab me in the front. That sounds overly dramatic, but then you understand what they're really
saying. Yes.
You're that one element right there. I've interviewed a lot of folks. I've never had anybody share that in the way you just did but how do you as a leader keep gossip from infecting the organization?
Well, the first thing is don't do it yourself. So that's rule number one. And then if you hear it, I think it's very important to say to somebody, have you talked with Annie about it? Does Josh know that you feel that way? Because I think if you can get people to understand that gossip for the sake of gossip is corrosive. If you really do have something that you think somebody isn't doing well, or you need more from that person, then go have that conversation with that person. And if you need me to facilitate, I'm happy to do that. But I'd really rather the two of you work it out person to person first. And then if we need to do something more, we'll do it. But transparency is an overused word too. But it is pretty important that people don't feel that something's being kept from them, particularly about their own performance. So very often somebody knows they're not performing very well, right?
Yes.
And as a leader, you can say to them, "Oh, well, let's talk about how we can make you more successful." I learned, I was a very young provost. I was 38 years old when I became provost of Stanford. I'd never been a dean. I'd never been a department chair even. And the Stanford provost is a very powerful provost. It's the chief operating officer of the university. And I would ask somebody to get something done, and then it wouldn't get done. And immediately I would think, well, it was passive aggressive, right? They didn't want to do it, so they weren't doing it. Sometimes they have no earthly idea how to get it done. And so if you can figure out how to help them get it done, you're doing your job as a leader.
Yeah. Connie, thank you so much. This, I learned the first time I had the chance to talk to you how, if I would just sit back and listen, how much I could absorb, and I did it again here. I'm grateful to you. Thank you for your service and for all that you've done for our country. But beyond that, thank you today for being a corporate competitor.
Well, it was terrific to be with you. Thank you very much. It was a great session, and good to see you again.
That was so much fun. But I loved right off the bat when she talked about as she looks at organizations, she's trying to identify, does the team have an identity? And that's a great question for us. Does our team have an identity? Do we know what it is we stand for, what people should expect, and what they can count on from us? Because that's what identity really is. It's something that everybody knows they're going to get when they face you, right? The second one was when she talked about the importance of bridging language into conversations, actually asking and even building out ways that she could help people understand each other in a room as heated and as impactful as the College Football Playoff Committee. And then finally, my third major takeaway was when we talked about teams at the end, how to build a great team, how to create. And it was just such a powerful exercise when she said, don't allow your team to gossip about one another. And if someone's doing it, call them out for them. Put two people together so that it gets right, because it's such a corrosive force within so many organizations. Gossip breaks it down. You start by not being the one to gossip, and you carry it forward by not allowing it to happen. What great insight and the kinds of words that you can get once in an interview. And today we got it. And I hope you enjoyed learning as much as I did.